Greetings. My name is Vicki Castiglione-Bornstein, and I'm here on behalf of St. Leo's Adult Education Committee. This morning we have a presentation for you from our very own Geoff Wood. If you missed his last presentation, that's available on the website, along with a lot of other presentations he's done over the years, available in written form. There's also a lot of articles, so we as a committee invite you to check the website and look at prior events and presentations that are located there. This morning, Geoff will be speaking on the readings for this coming month, November, which will conclude the liturgical year, Cycle A, as we head into Advent in December. So thank you, Geoff, so much for doing this for us. We're very grateful, and to Father Jojo and Elizabeth for making this possible for us to have in our home. So stay safe, everyone. God bless you all. Geoff.
Okay. I want to introduce you to some of the liturgical readings scheduled for November this year. But before doing that, I wanted to say a few words about this wonderful gift we have called language. I'm not sure how many people now remember Lenny Bruce. It would be inadequate to call him merely a stand-up comic. He was such a pioneer in front of the microphone during the 1950s and 60s. A bit outrageous, you might say, but funny in a satirical sort of way. Actually, being Jewish, he might be registered among the prophets or social critics who tend to rise out of that tradition. Anyway, I want to start this presentation with a routine he did back then. A Lenny Bruce character enters a drugstore and takes a stool at the soda fountain and leans on the counter. Suddenly, behind the counter, there appears a huge figure wearing a fez and Middle Eastern attire. The Lenny character is surprised and asks, "Who are you?" The figure replies, waving his arms, "I am a genie just out of the bottle, and you have 3 wishes. I'll make you whatever you want." So the Lenny character responds, "Make me a malt." And the genie says, "You're a malt." Now I think that's funny, but very much in line with the opening verses of the book of Genesis, where God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. The very word had an effect. The very word changed darkness into light. And such changes, simply spoken, make their way all the way through the first chapter of Genesis. Let the earth bring forth vegetation, and so it happened. Let there be lights in the sky, and so it happened. Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, and so it happened. See, I give you every seed-bearing plant and every tree. And so it happened. As soon as God spoke the words, the things he named came out of his mouth. They materialized irreversibly. The uttered word was an event, not just a sound, but a happening that endured. The words were what the scholar Northrop Frye calls words with power. Words are more than just a collection of consonants and vowels. They possess a kind of vitality, dynamism, even when just lying there silent on the page. They only need a pair of human lungs to give them voice and release their power. Like in one of my dreams, looking upon the opening page of the central prayer of the Mass, upon which, even as I was about to speak, the letters turned into flowers row upon row before my eyes. like an illuminated manuscript, alive, colorful, leaving me at a loss as to what to read, what to say, full of wonder. Language comes in different shapes and colors. We are so used to language that we take it for granted, but we use it in several ways. We use it to describe things, as in that tree is an oak tree, or the earth circles the sun, or the coronavirus originated in China. We tell it like it is. Indeed, science speaks in mathematics to ensure the factuality of what it says, that it's not speaking fantasy. Or we use language to speculate about things, not so much to describe them in everyday terms, but in purer words and concepts, philosophically. We use terms like nature, substance, being, existence, essence, cause, effect, abstract language that attempts to transcend everyday talk in search of ideas that are clearer than our imagination allows. For the philosopher, there is nothing more intoxicating than an infinity of possibilities. Or we use language to motivate, as by way of political rhetoric. As in Franklin D. Roosevelt's inaugural address many years ago, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Unlike descriptive and speculative speech, rhetorical speech tends to take liberties, exaggerates, may say anything to deceive as much as to inform, anything that may win a vote, or sell a house, or charge up a football team. We are subjected to it every time a commercial interrupts what we're watching on TV. Rhetoric. But there is also something about such rhetorical speech that smacks of poetry's own liberty to reach beyond factual and abstract ways of speech in a seductive way. So poetry itself, honest poetry, is then our fourth manner of speech, whereby we ponder out of a deeper sense of things, not repressing but releasing our sentiments about things, what we feel, as in blessings on thee, little man, barefoot boy with cheek of tan, the sunshine on thy face, through thy turnbrim's jaunty grace. From my heart I give thee joy. I was once a barefoot boy. It's a kind of speech that evokes emotion, even tears. The sentiment of the poet becomes your sentiment, right then and there, even as the Lenny character became, at once, a malt. Or listen to Hamlet in the first verses of Shakespeare's that I was required to memorize when I was in high school. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself to a dew, or that the everlasting his cannon against self-slaughter. Oh God, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on it, a fie! 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. Maybe you feel like that upon reading the newspaper every morning. Hopeless, thinking Idaho, Montana, mistakenly, as if that would change things. Where does language come from? You could say that other living creatures have a language. The growling of a lion, the tweeting of the birds, the mooing of a cow, the barking of a dog. And those sounds convey a meaning. If only that a bark means, get off my property. But as human beings, we speak with an almost infinitely wider and deeper range of meaning. Indeed, we speak the world around us into an order that serves our needs and even probes boundlessly beyond with what we see into the mysteries that remain. We can't shut up. One could say we acquire language from our elders, that we are taught the language we speak. That's how we get it. We are taught the alphabet, then we put the letters together into words, and then we read sentences like, the dog run, until we are well on our way to becoming maybe another Shakespeare, or at least a journalist. But deep thinkers, especially if they're German, they all seem to be German, trace our capacity for language to our very origin as human beings. If we agree that as human beings we have arisen from some creative source, along with everything else that exists, then that creative source itself must also be the prehistoric source of our ability to speak, our gift of language. Speech and thought are of the essence of human nature to begin with. The source of our unique capacity to name and organize and relate things and proclaim things and praise things and sing meaningfully. Language comes to us from our very roots in God. It's not an invention of our own. It's a miracle of nature. Evidence of human reverence for language seems to lie in ancient times, that they had more, and the location of its reverent use. Today, as secularized people, educated to prefer science over make-believe, we don't go to some temple or some sanctuary of some god, to Delphi or Canterbury. We resort to statistics. We consult with the corporation or the Center for Disease Control or universities to get valid answers to things past, present, and future. We conduct polls, track percentages. Polls make up much of the news of the day. That's our kind of prophecy today. Not so in ancient times. If you wanted to know what was what on a national or even a personal level, you went to the local temple of whatever divine power you revered and consulted cult prophets, oracle givers, seers, not only to learn, but to effect the outcome of whatever you requested, to actually turn somebody into a malt. Such consultation runs all through our Hebrew Bible. In the books of Samuel, characters are consulting ordained temple prophets the way we consult cell phones today, to know what was happening or going to happen, for words prosaic or sublime. Sublime, for instance, the book of Isaiah records King Ahaz's refusal to consult God in a crisis. God, through the prophet, speaks words of more profundity than even the prophet realizes about a young woman conceiving a son whose name will be Emmanuel. But in a modern secularized world where religion is more of a side than influential running of things, deep thinkers have observed that language at every level of society has been reduced to chatter, jargon, mere talk, indeed talkathons every day on TV, breath, as though were we to stop talking and advertising and ranting, the world would fall apart. It would be like our globe losing its ozone layer due to the excess of what we call hot air. Yet there are still modern prophets who plead with us to settle down, focus on the more vital questions, discuss why we exist, where we come from, other than the dust of the earth. What's life seriously about? What makes us fundamentally human? In other words, all the things that our own Judeo-Christian tradition values so much, even if we, its members, are forgetful of such questions. Such forgetfulness can be dangerous. Language gets debased, turned into an assault weapon, becomes toxic. Listen to how one critic describes the rhetoric of modern politics. Such bluster deliberately attempts to put our minds to sleep, become hypnotized, reduced to a whirlpool of boring cliches. And what often issues from such language is a monster called the mob. The language, even of religion, can become debased, become a dead language, no longer understood or influential, standardized. Okay. Vatican II made an attempt to draw us out of that status. Okay. In the context of such diffusing of language, there has risen of late a new respect for the more graphic, imaginative language of story, parables, drama, poems. I mean, look at the Gospels. Talk about you're a malt. Miracles abound in Scripture. And what's a miracle but the immediate effect of a spoken word? The Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, says of Jesus, people were astonished at his teaching because he spoke words with power. There was something about what this unordained carpenter from an insignificant town called Nazareth was proclaiming that struck home, the essence of which is to be found in his parables and preaching like the Sermon on the Mount. It woke people up. Those words of Paul, St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, words within the context of a Jesuit's lecture, resonant with the teaching of Jesus himself, that changed me on the spot in a classroom in Rome 62 years ago, about which I have often spoken. These words were, no human being will be justified by observing the law, for through the law comes only consciousness of sin. The law does not save, it condemns. Which said to me, as it has said to me, rolling that boulder of guilt up a hill every day, only to have it roll back down again and again, is over. God is a God of understanding and sheer grace, not judgment. And Paul goes on to say, thanks to the intervention in history of this Jesus, we have peace with God and access to this grace in which we stand. He says we now have parousia, a Greek word for freedom of speech. We need no longer be tongue-tied with fear. We are free to converse intimately, that's the word, intimately with God and the whole of creation, to become poetic in thought and discourse. This is what the New Testament means by freedom of speech, a virtue so needed in a world where argumentation, often so blind and bitter, dominates speech. And the effect, having heard all that, I became a malt. I was no longer the person I was. Entered the classroom. Immediate change occurred due to the magic of those words with power. They hit home, became resonant ever since, ever audible even now. They touched upon something that was stifling me unconsciously since my childhood. All the energy that went into rolling that boulder of guilt up that hill over and over again came back to me for better use, like becoming relaxed, released, grateful, and graceful, even as God is graceful. All those miracle stories in the Gospels were crafted by the early church to illustrate the suddenness of that healing, release, that widening of consciousness I felt that day and ever since. A paralytic is lowered to a space of Jesus, who says, I say to you, rise, pick up your mat and go home. He rose, picked up his mat, and as I did that very moment, and went away. We have a man with a withered hand, and Jesus says, after exchange with the legalist Pharisee, stretch out your hand. And his hand became alive and flexible, as I did that very moment in Rome. And then we have the little girl who died, and he takes her by the hand and says, Talitha cum. Little girl, I see your eyes. The girl arose immediately, as I did. Then in Luke's Gospel, we have that blind beggar of Jericho, to whom Jesus says, recover your sight. And immediately he recovered his sight, as I did. So much became clearer in that moment. Or Jesus is awakened in a boat by a storm at sea, and rises and muzzles the wind and the waves, crying, quiet, be still. And the wind ceased, and there came a great calm, as came over me that very day in Rome. What was that song that made Doris Day famous? That begins, you sigh, the song begins. You speak, and I hear violins. It's magic. Well, if I can turn this page here, we can go on with the talk. There we go. I want to apply what we've been talking about to the liturgical readings, or some of the liturgical of November. And let's take the second Sunday in November. First reading is from the Book of Wisdom, chapter 6, verse 12, which begins, resplendent and unfading is wisdom, and she is readily perceived by those who love her, and found by those who seek her. Now the secret is not just to listen from afar, but to let the words envelop and penetrate your imagination, absorb you. Place yourself in the attitude of the poet. Experience the text as a call for you to awake out of your obsession with Twitter and the idle talk that make of the limited lives we lead a waste of time, of missed opportunities to be. Become alert to the very source of all being, feminine, seductive. She is not far off, can easily be discovered. Indeed, she is sitting at your gate, eager to make herself known to you, rising with the sun every morning, who forever makes her rounds, ready to appear to you in ways you least expect. of a solicitude for you that is eternal, a solicitude that is contagious enough to make of you a person ever solicitous for others, for our world, and therefore fully alive. Then we move on to the psalm. Emerging from that experience of this Sunday's first reading, you are now ripe to make the prayer of today's psalm your own. So make it so. Is thirsting for you, O Lord my God, for you, for the meaning you bring to me. My flesh, my soul thirsts like the earth, parched, lifeless, without water. And so I gaze toward you and look for you everywhere in this world, which is a holy place, pulsating with your power and brightness. I lift up my hands and acknowledge your presence everywhere. Existence as a banquet nourishes my soul. Even during the hours of the night upon my bed, even during the darkness that broods over a confused world, I am somehow awake to your nearness. And moving on to the gospel for that Sunday, don't just read it or relate to the story from afar again. Become the parable. Become the 5 wise and 5 foolish virgins. Like I anticipate a wedding, a festal moment, my discovery that the world makes sense, that a God of grace is at the core and origin of it. It's not all nonsense, but can be festive if known in depth. There is a part of me that waits enthusiastically to discover this, oiled up, as it were. But there is a drag in my makeup that is sleepy with a kind of despair, no reserve of faith, hope. Nevertheless, maybe I hear a shout, a wake-up call, a change in my makeup. A party is about to start. Awareness, energy, life, a Eucharist, evermore. That reluctant part of me even begins to wake up. But whether it does or not, the me that is well-oiled, capable of being lit up, is off to the banquet rather than end up missing out on discovering what life is all about. Now, obviously, this is something you can't do in the limited time and movement of the actual liturgy. But it is something you can do by preparing for the readings, engaging with them before you attend the liturgy, and an ideal practice for those who still attend the small group meetings every month. Let me give you one more example. And just the gospel from the third Sunday in November. Here we have the parable of the talents, which has a double meaning as far as we're concerned. Entrusted by an absent rich man to 3 servants. The idea to invest the talents and increase the rich man's wealth. As I immerse myself in the flow of this story, I become each of the servants. I accept responsibility for the talents I am given. Or do I? Frankly, based on my own biography, I started out reluctant to take responsibility for anything, unless somebody forced me, be it my father or mother, or a classroom nun, or the parish priest, or society in general. I say, unless some collective superego hung over me, talking guilt and consequences, one minute, or also, don't stick your neck out, the next. Low profile was my way of surviving, because you could get hurt otherwise. So I start out this parable as a third fellow with 1 talent, which he buries. That's me. That was me, anyway. Indeed, feeling that I wasn't as talented as the others to begin with. But as time went on, And thanks to the constant intrusion of that lady wisdom we experienced above, evidence of what talents I actually had began to be manifest, and I was helped along by some really good mentors in the course of my life, much to my surprise, and with them a greater sense of responsibility, a readiness to take risks, to cultivate what I had into a richer sense of who and where and why I am, along with a richer sense of other people as gifted in their own, sometimes unconscious ways. I learned the lesson that to everyone who has, more will be given. That's how God's world works. And I learned, if I doubt the gift of my existence to the point of escapism, distractions all the time, I would only wind up wailing and gnashing my teeth. And who wants to live that way? So think about that. I usually end with a little postscript, normally a poem, and I found one by Dylan Thomas called Notes on the Art of Poetry. Now, you could say it is simply a poem about this gift called language. It goes, I could never have dreamt that there were such goings-on in the world between the books, such sandstorms, ice blasts of words, such staggering peace, such enormous laughter, such and so many blinding bright lights, splashing all over the pages in a million bits and pieces, all of which were words, 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 and each of which were alive forever. Amen. That'll be 5 cents, please. Okay. Thank you.